are the perfect choice for this mission. However, I think it's important that you understand the ramifications of the decision you're making.
I wouldn't have volunteered if I didn't understand the consequences.
Come on, Pearl! It's clear! I think we lost Fender in this pirate. Get going, Pearl! I'll try to hold him here. Find a slinger to help you, Pearl. Now! Let her go!
To Atlanta.
To cure the plague with the information that she's carrying.
I want to own it.
Own the cure.
I'd be a god.
Why did you help me? I can trust you.
For what?
To get me back to Atlanta. There's a group of doctors there, the last ones. They've been working on a cure for the plague. They need information I have. I'm a cyborg.
I'll take you to Atlanta, and you'll give me the cure.
You don't want my help?
No,
Think you can rescue her by yourself?
it's not my business.
You're not gonna try to save this woman? You don't care? What do you care about?
Fender.
In April of 1989, one of the last feature films financed and distributed by Cannon Films made its theatrical release, Cyborg. Produced on a very small budget of $500,000, it made over $10 million in the USA alone. With the success of Bloodsport, Van Damme was becoming a popular action star, and many flocked to see his latest movie despite very poor reviews from critics at the time. Cyborg even got a comic book adaptation. However, you can see from the quality of the artwork, it looks like some artist sketched it up on their lunch break. As with many Cannon releases, and especially with Jean-Claude's rising popularity, it was very successful on home video and was given a widescreen release on Laserdisc. Now, how the film came about is probably the film's most interesting aspect. With Cannon Films acquiring the rights to Marvel's Spider-Man and retaining the rights to Mattel's He-Man license, Cannon wanted to make a Spider-Man film and a sequel to Masters of the Universe. However, Cannon's finances were in dire straits at this point. After so many box office flops and due to the stock market crash of October of 1987, Cannon were in serious trouble, and they needed to make some quick hits to ease the cash flow. Masters of the Universe had not lived up to their expectations, and was a flop with audiences around the world. However, they still wanted to take advantage of the license, and blamed its failure on Dolph Lundgren, so they wanted to recast him. Spider-Man was stuck in limbo, and both the licenses were set to expire. Albert Pyun was in the Cannon offices at the time, and heard that the director of Spider-Man, Joe Zito, had left the project, and so he approached Cannon with an offer to take over both productions, and shoot both movies back to back. He would shoot Spider-Man first when the actor playing Peter Parker was in normal shape, then they would move on to He-Man 2, and shoot all the principal photography and return to Spider-Man when the actor playing him had bulked up. All Cannon needed to know was how much it was going to cost, which Albert judged it at $4 million for both. Masters of the Universe Part 2 had no script at that point, and Albert came up with a treatment draft and got a screenwriter to finish it up. Albert set about looking for a new He-Man, and found a surfer called Laird Hamilton. Laird came in to be interviewed, bringing along his friend Vincent Klein. Albert was impressed, and even though Vincent wasn't suitable for a character in Masters of the Universe, he felt maybe for something else later down the line. Albert wanted to do a darker sequel to He-Man, focusing on Skeletor, who makes it to Earth and creates a corporate monolith that he uses to build up an army and new technology. He-Man heads to Earth and has to live like a regular human in order to go undercover to locate Skeletor. They set up shop in North Carolina, using the Dino De Laurentiis studios, making use of a New York backstreet that was left from a previous production, so both Spider-Man and He-Man 2 were set to use this set piece. However, whilst scouting for other locations, they heard the rights for both properties were lost due to a check bouncing on Cannon's behalf. It seems Cannon had spent too much money preparing both movies, but Albert felt it would be a waste of money to just write them off. In order to make some quick cash, Albert generated interest in doing a futuristic western called Slinger, which was the original title of the film before it was renamed to Cyborg, and had Chuck Norris in mind for the lead role, who was still under contract with Cannon. However, Cannon had Jean-Claude in mind due to the box office success of Bloodsport. Albert didn't know much about Van Damme, having only seen bits and pieces of Bloodsport, which he wasn't that impressed with. He was unsure about Jean-Claude's acting abilities, and his accent being too heavy to play an American. Cannon said if he wanted to make this film, Slinger, he would have to use Jean-Claude, which Albert agreed to. He met with Jean-Claude, who was very excited to be involved. Now, the movie's cast is pretty small, with a number of stuntmen reused to play different characters. I believe the movie only had 4 stuntmen who they would redress to take part in the extended fight scenes. Jean-Claude Van Damme plays Gibson, a slinger who is a warrior for hire. He wanders the wasteland hunting down Fender, who killed the love of his life. Jean-Claude was a rising star at the time. He came to many people's attention in Bloodsport, which he saved from being shit-canned by Cannon Films when they weren't impressed with the movie's original edit. Jean-Claude took it upon himself to re-edit the movie, which proved successful. Jean-Claude's dialogue was trimmed down for Cyborg because of his thick accent and limited grasp of the English language. He took on a fitness regime and diet to get into bigger and better shape for the movie, but because he is covered up for most of the movie, he wanted the crucifix scene and final battle to be moments he could show off his new bulkier physique. During the production, Jean-Claude would often like to hit the stuntman with just a small tap to give the fights a more realistic impact, but many of the stuntmen would complain about bruising when they took part in the fight scenes. Unfortunately, Van Damme injured one stuntman called Jason Rott Pinkney. On set, Jackson lost his sight in one eye during a sword fight. Jean-Claude was taken to court and Jackson eventually won a settlement. Albert reveals in the audio commentary for the film that he felt Jackson was off his mark, resulting in Jean-Claude accidentally hitting him. Vincent Klein plays Fender, the head of the pirates. Vincent was already in good shape, but did additional exercise to match Jean-Claude's for the final battle. Fender's outfit is the remains of what Skeletor wore for Masters of the Universe 2, and his contact lenses. Dale Haddon plays the cyborg Pearl. Dale was famous for makeup adverts for L'Oreal during the 70s and early 80s. She heads to New York to retrieve information so scientists can use the data in Atlanta to complete the antidote for the cure. Deborah Richter plays Nadie Simmons. She joins Gibson as he attempts to track down Fender. Nadie is concerned about Gibson's motives, worried that he is not out to protect Pearl and find a cure. The movie opens in the future, where civilization has been nearly wiped out by a plague known as the Living Death. A small group of scientists in Atlanta have discovered a possible cure, but require more information to solve it. A cyborg called Pearl is escorted on her journey to New York to retrieve data, but a group of pirates led by Fender have discovered she holds the key to the cure. Fender wants to own the cure so he can live as a god, so Pearl is told to run ahead and find a slinger. The theatrical cut of the film doesn't actually explain what a slinger is, but you get the impression they are warriors for hire. A slinger called Gibson, who at first thought she was someone else, rescues Pearl. She explains she holds the cure, and that she is a cyborg. They are suddenly attacked by Fender and his gang, and Gibson is buried in rubble. Fender says he will protect her on her return to Atlanta if she gives him the cure. Heading south to Atlanta, Fender and his moronic followers attack a village, killing all the families and steal a boat. Gibson breaks free and starts tracking the pirates, finding the slaughtered families along the way. Suddenly, a shadowy figure attacks him, but he disables her and knocks her out. She turns out to be Nadie Simmons, a young woman who mistook him as a pirate. Nadie reveals her family was wiped out by the plague and wants to join Gibson. Gibson seems less concerned with a cure for the plague than with destroying Fender, who killed the woman he loved, which is revealed in flashbacks. Gibson and Nady trek southward throughout the wastelands where wandering bandits ambush them. Despite Gibson and Nady travelling on foot, they seem to catch up with Fender and his bozo friends very quickly despite them making it ahead in a boat. Concerned for Nady, Gibson unsuccessfully attempts to convince her to stay away as he approaches Fender. Intercepting Fender and his crew, Nady gets knocked out again, and Gibson defeats most of his men, but he gets taken down by an arrow or sort of nail gun. It's hard to know what they actually fire, but the guns do look cool though. Now nursing a wound, Gibson realises a member of Fender's crew is Hayley. Hayley was introduced in flashbacks as the little girl Gibson took care of before Fender came along and took her away, killing the woman he loved. He flees the pirates and ends up alone with Pearl as he helps Nady. Pearl refuses to go with him. She calculates that Gibson is not strong enough to defeat Fender and will be unable to get her back to Atlanta safely. She says she will go along with Fender and lure him into his death in Atlanta. Gibson is disappointed and fails to escape. Fender crucifies him and leaves him to slowly die. In 2011, Albert Pyun released his own cut of Cyborg, using its original title of Slinger. His original cut only exists on VHS, but thankfully the footage is still watchable. In October of 1988, he was removed from editing Cyborg after audiences weren't happy with a number of screen tests. Albert had originally wanted the film to be in black and white, which didn't please the Cannon producers. Jean-Claude and his friend Sheldon Lettish re-edited the movie and changed the score to please Cannon Films, who wanted a straightforward action flick. The director's cut doesn't feature loads of added gore or many new scenes that will make it a radically different film. Some fans of the original were expecting it to be an uncut version and were bitterly disappointed. The new cut changes the cyborg's motives. Instead of finding a cure, they are trying to restore electricity to the country. All evidence of a virus apparent in the theatrical cut has been removed. There is a strong religious theme running throughout the film, with Fender wanting to create hell on earth, seeing himself as Satan. However, some scenes are removed for this director's cut. You don't see Fender and his gang attack the village and steal the boat they used to make their way to Atlanta. The final battle ends with Fender being cut in half with a knife, a scene restored in that final edit by Albert to replace the second battle where Fender is impaled on a hook. The second face-off were reshoots done on a different location because the original set was no longer available. I don't think Cannon and Jean-Claude were happy with the original fight. They also added some close-up shots of Van Damme to be included in the original punch-up. You can still obtain the director's cut on DVD and Blu-ray. Albert did release his cut that you could purchase from his company, but that version is all from a VHS master tape. However, a German company called Platinum Cult Edition last year released a Blu-ray with a number of special features and spliced the HD theatrical cut with the director's cut footage, so when watching it you know what's new. So, the director's cut. It starts with a new credit intro and goes into more detail about what a slinger is. It has a voiceover which I'm presuming is Van Damme's character talking to a random person, although you never find out who they are, and the voiceover doesn't make any attempts to sound like Jean-Claude. This voiceover pops up now and again during the film and after he defeats Fender. More is revealed about Fender's motives when he beats down Pearl's helper. His religious ideals are revealed. He is working for Satan and creating a hell on earth. Pearl's mission is mentioned about restoring electricity and the existing technology. Pearl has a robotic voice in this cut. Flashbacks to Gibson's past are moved forward to the market sequence after he gives the kid his ball back. During these scenes you see Hayley, the daughter of the woman he falls in love with. She reveals she wants to be a slinger one day because they kill pirates. A new scene is shown where Van Damme attacks a bunch of pirates who killed the child from earlier after he discovers the ball covered in blood. During the scene where Gibson catches up with Pearl, there is new dialogue with Fender taunting Gibson. Intercutting with flashbacks, the music score for this scene works really well. More scenes with Hayley growing up showing her remembering Gibson. The fight scene in the marshy wasteland is cut down, the extending staff the pirate used was removed. During the crucifix scene, Fender mocks Hayley, asking if she cares about Gibson, as she stands there showing concerns for him as he is left to die. Flashbacks are cut down during the crucifix scene because most were introduced earlier. When Gibson reaches Atlanta after being freed by Nady, there is added dialogue with Nady calling Gibson Gibbs and telling him to kick Fender's ass. They remove the scene with Gibson firing the arrow. You can just see it land in front of Fender, which is a good thing because in the original cut you can clearly see he doesn't have an arrow in the bow. An extra level of cheapness there. There is an extra shot of Fender trying to kill Haley as she screams out for him to stop hurting Gibson. The end fight has additional scenes where Van Damme encourages Fender to punch him, but it's also trimmed down a little with no shots of Van Damme punching back. As mentioned earlier, the final death is more graphic, plus the second fight was cut. The voiceover at the end, which is Gibson's, discusses love beating the darkness and a sense of hope for the future. The ending is totally different with its use of dialogue. The Cyborg and her colleague want to take over and rule once they restore the power. There is a final shot where a naked Cyborg appears, which doesn't really make any sense, and you can see an error in the cross dissolve as it clips from a previous frame from the original footage. It ends with a title for the next film called Cyborg Nemesis: The Dark Rift, which I imagine is a sequel Albert is working on. Fantasy II Film Effects Company provided the 2 matte paintings for the film and the animated cyborg sequences. Fantasy II were a popular company to use when working on limited budgets, but they also provided work on high budget feature films. The matte paintings are really well detailed and added some great scope to the movie. I think if the shots weren't included, the film would have looked far cheaper than it actually is. The animated sequences with the cyborg are nicely handled and give an extra air of sci-fi to the film, and the detailed animatronic for the robot during its operating procedure does further sell the idea that she is a cyborg. It's a shame there weren't more matte paintings and further moments with the cyborg revealing its true form. Kevon Bassington composed the score to the theatrical cut. Kevon has only composed about 10 films and has mainly worked as a music editor, working on films such as Gran Torino, Changeling, Flight 93 and a large number of popular TV shows. The score is all done electronically, which was a popular method during the 80s. It does sound very cheap though and rushed in areas. I think down to the quick changes made to the final edit and the music from Albert's cut being removed, it's understandable as to why it doesn't really live up to other synthesized scores at the time. There are some nice cues during the action sequences, but the movie would have benefited from something more epic, which I'm sure Kevon could have done if he had more time and money. James Sade and Anthony Riparetti provided the score to Albert's original cut, and it's presented on the director's cut DVD and Blu-ray. Some fans had expressed their negativity towards it. It has a more heavy metal feel to it, especially during the opening shot of the city. The guitar riff can be a little off-putting, and in some scenes the music works better in the theatrical cut. But for me, most of the time the score on the director's cut was far better. It sounded more epic during the final battle and more emotional, especially during the flashback scenes. If you watch the opening and closing montages to this review, most of the music is from the director's cut, and you can decide for yourselves if it sounds better or not. 1993 saw a sequel to Cyborg. Van Damme did not return and it bared little connection to the first film, appearing to have a far different setting. None involved in the original Cannon Films production made a return. The sequel, however, stars more well-known actors: Elias Koteas, Jack Palance and Angelina Jolie in her first lead role. The sequel does use footage from the original film to create some link between them. It's very lazily done though, just so they could use the name to sell it despite it being radically different. For the film's limited budget, it looks far more polished and imaginative than the original Cyborg. In 1995, a direct-to-video sequel was made, called Cyborg 3: The Recycler, starring Malcolm McDowell and Zach Galligan. Like the others, it's set in the future and the remaining cyborgs are hunted down for their spare parts. Both of the sequels were met with negative reviews, very much like the Van Damme film. But if they intrigue you, I'd recommend Cyborg 2. It's a bit of a guilty pleasure to some, so you may get some enjoyment out of it. I first saw Cyborg in the mid-90s. I was going through a Van Damme phase. Many of his back catalogue of movies were going for £5 each, brand new, and my parents didn't mind me watching these action flicks despite most of them being 18 rated. I finally came across Cyborg. I liked the premise of the movie and the cover looked awesome. Anything set in a post-apocalyptic future always grabs my attention. I got home, slapped it on, watched it and hated it. I found the story so thin, the fight scenes forgettable and the pace of the movie plods along even with its short running time of 86 minutes. Now as I got older, I revisited the movie a couple of times and found it more enjoyable on repeated viewing. Now I'm still fully aware of its problems, but I find it more tolerable. From the beginning I was expecting better fight scenes, as the original cut has many moments where they repeat the shots from different angles to extend the fight, a similar problem I highlighted in the Kickboxer review. It's an editing style Jean-Claude would use a lot in his early movies, which I was never a fan of. The coverage of the battles are often shot in extreme close-up, especially during the end battle, making it difficult to see what's going on. The choreography for the most part is uninspired. You have this build-up to the end battle with Gibson and Fender, but it just results in a boring punch-up, throwing punches back and forth and the odd kick here and there. On the audio commentary for the film, which is a fantastic listen if you get the chance to hear it, Albert Pyun said audiences were laughing when the final battle kicked off, and you see Fender and Gibson just screaming at each other. When I rewatch it, it is hilarious. I know what they are trying to do with the scene, intimidating each other and all that fluff, but it is just ridiculous. It ends up being comedy gold. The theatrical cut makes huge use of slow motion, which artificially extends the movie. If they didn't use slow-mo, it would probably only be an hour long. I don't mind the use of the technique, but it's employed too much throughout the film. It often outstays its welcome. Albert Pyun makes great use of the camera, with some interesting low angles, using a wide lens, and when Van Damme does the splits to surprise one of the pirates, it's nicely lit. The photography is very good for its short shooting schedule. For the limited budget, they made a great effort to make up the existing set piece of the New York street, and the locations you see throughout the film really bring across that barren and empty wasteland. The script for Cyborg was written up pretty quickly and contains ideas from other projects Albert was working on prior to this. You get a sense there wasn't much of a plot, and with the limited dialogue throughout the film, it feels more of a silent movie at some points. The title Cyborg is a bit misleading, as there isn't much focus on Pearl, and it feels much more about Gibson seeking revenge on Fender. The original title of Slinger doesn't really work, and most would just be confused on what it means. They should have just called it Hell on Earth, with a picture of Van Damme being crucified in front of a destroyed city. The flashbacks do help flesh out Van Damme's character and motives for revenge. Because of his limited dialogue, this helps give a better understanding of who he is. Seeing Fender lower him and the woman and child he came to care for into a well, chained up with barbed wire, is pretty disturbing and gives the audience a reason to get behind him and want to seek revenge. The character Haley, who is forced to lower them into the well, joins Fender, and when she comes across Gibson later on and remembers him, she stares blankly at him and has no dialogue and only says a few lines near the end. You don't feel there is any connection between her and Gibson. It just feels like something they forgot to focus on in the final stages of making the film. Most people watching it for the first time will instantly realise the acting is pretty bad throughout. Many of the cast members had little to no acting experience, especially the main villain Fender. He gives a very wooden performance with a clumsy delivery of his dialogue. Van Damme always has that intensity to his performances and gets the look he so desires onto the screen. He does a better job than the actor Vincent with his dialogue, but as I said earlier, they don't say much throughout. So what's better, the theatrical cut or the director's cut? Albert Pyun's version certainly fleshes out the conflict between Fender and Gibson. The additional scenes, and there aren't many, help expand the story a bit more, but the idea of just rebooting the electricity as the main goal and not trying to find a cure to a virus that wiped a large majority of the population out is a very weak idea, and the ending just ruins all the hard work Gibson went through with the cyborgs just wanted to take over. I like the fact that Fender sees himself as a satanic leader who wants to bring about hell on earth and enjoys the suffering of others in the director's cut. The soundtrack I feel is a lot better as well, but all in all, the theatrical cut makes a better effort with its narrative. It's a simple, straightforward story that is easy to follow. The added voiceover and adjustments to the dialogue in the director's cut makes things a little confusing and out of place, and the drop in quality of the picture doesn't really help with the viewing experience. It's a nice little addition to see what Albert was trying to do, and it's good it's available to watch, but at this point where Cannon Films needed a quick hit to boost their profits, trying to tell a story with a deep theme of religion with random dumps of voiceover was not what people wanted from a Van Damme action flick. For newcomers, Cyborg can be difficult to recommend. I don't think there is enough good quality content to make it a full recommendation. There are bits and pieces which I highlighted which I think deserved merit, but the weak dialogue and acting don't do it any favours, and you may be turned off by it or find yourself laughing unintentionally. For viewers who grew up on it, and like many of us including myself who are fans of Jean-Claude Van Damme, there is always going to be that nostalgic factor. For some, this may be the first film they saw him in, or maybe you enjoy the premise of seeing Van Damme in a post-apocalyptic future and can enjoy it for that reason alone. Its faults with the story, acting and pacing may not be of concern, and it can be enjoyed for the straightforward revenge piece it is. It's funny to see one of the last movies that Cannon Films produced was a cheap B-movie that featured action, violence and nudity, all themes that made them popular in the first place. It may not be high art, but it's entertaining schlock. That's good enough for me.
Wait here.
I'm not gonna stay here.
I want you out of my way until I see what's going on.
Look, I'm here to make sure that woman lives. And I'm not gonna let you do anything that could hurt her.
Nothing's going to happen to her. It's a promise. Come on.
I'm not going with you. You're not strong enough to get me to Atlanta. Fender would eventually catch us. Maybe kill me. Certainly kill you. Look, Fender must be destroyed. In Atlanta, we have the means. I'll lead him to his death. Nothing can stop him in this world. Not even you.
If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe. You can find more retrospective reviews by clicking on these videos. If you want to watch my upcoming reviews early before they go live on YouTube, you can support me through Patreon.